Let me start by saying this. I've never been the kind of person to believe in ghosts. I don't read about hauntings, I don't watch paranormal shows, and I definitely don't go looking for weird stuff. I've always been practical. The type to explain away creaks in the night as pipes or shadows as tricks of the light. But what happened in my last apartment made me question everything I thought I knew about what's real and what's not. I moved into that building 3 years ago. It wasn't fancy, but it had character. Creaky hardwood floors, high ceilings, and those big old windows that let in way too much morning light. It was one of those small, 3-story walk-ups with maybe 10 units total. The kind of place where you recognize everyone's face, but don't necessarily know their names. At first I loved it. It was quiet, cheap, and only a few blocks from work. The apartment next to mine, 2B, was rented by a woman named Margaret, though she told me to call her Mara. She looked to be in her early 40s, always wore long skirts, and had the softest kind of presence. The type of person who could walk into a room and somehow make it feel calmer. She smelled faintly of jasmine tea and old books. We talked occasionally in the hallway. Nothing deep, just neighbor stuff. Good morning, nice weather. You got any mail by mistake? Then one day she invited me in for tea. Her apartment was different. Where mine was plain, white walls, minimal furniture, hers looked like a time capsule. Heavy curtains, embroidered tablecloths, porcelain cups, and an old record player that was somehow always playing something slow and nostalgic. There were paintings of faceless people on the walls and a clock that ticked out of rhythm, but it all fit her. I only stayed for about 20 minutes, but I remember how peaceful it felt. When I left, she smiled and said, "You have a kind face. I hope you'll stay a while." I thought she meant the building. A few weeks went by. I'd see her in the hallway, sometimes carrying groceries or a potted plant from the little balcony. We'd exchange a nod, sometimes a few words, and that was it. Then, one Thursday morning, I realized something strange. Her door was slightly open, not much, just a few inches. Enough to see darkness inside. I hesitated but knocked anyway. No answer. Out of courtesy, I called through the gap. "Hey, Mara, it's me, your neighbor." Still nothing. After a moment, I gently pushed the door shut and made a mental note to check in later. That night when I came home, her door was closed and locked, with her welcome mat gone. I assumed maybe she'd gone on a trip, except she never came back. Days turned into weeks, and I stopped hearing the faint sound of her record player through the wall. No footsteps, no movement. The mailbox outside started filling up. Letters, flyers, a couple of packages that sat untouched until someone eventually took them away. At first I figured maybe she'd moved out quietly, but I found that hard to believe. She never mentioned moving, and she'd seemed settled. So one afternoon I ran into the landlord, Mr. Tate, while he was fixing something near the stairs. I asked casually, "Hey, what happened to the woman in 2B? Did she move out?" He frowned. "2B? Yeah, Mara," I said. Middle-aged, always had tea, wore long skirts. He looked genuinely confused. "Son, there's no one in 2B. Hasn't been for years." I laughed awkwardly, thinking he was joking. "No, seriously. I talked to her last month." But he didn't smile. He just shook his head. "That apartment's been empty since 2019. Water and power are still shut off. You must have seen someone else." The way he said it, so flat and certain, sent a chill down my spine. I didn't push it. I just nodded and went back upstairs, trying to tell myself maybe he'd mixed up the unit numbers. Maybe he meant 3B. But later that night, curiosity got the better of me. I went to her door. It was locked, just like before. The hallway was quiet, that old kind of quiet that seems to hum in your ears. I leaned close and listened. Nothing. Then I noticed something odd, the faint scent of jasmine. Fresh, like she'd just made tea. I told myself maybe the smell came from the apartment below or the stairwell. I forced myself to walk away, but over the next few days I kept catching it, that same floral scent, every time I passed her door. And then came the humming. It started faintly, a low tuneless hum that I could hear through the wall between our apartments. Sometimes it was just a few notes, sometimes a long, drawn-out melody with no rhythm, always around 10 p.m. I recorded it once, but the playback was just static. Eventually, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I decided to ask Mr. Tate again. When I caught him downstairs, I said, "You're sure no one's in 2B?" He sighed and said, "That apartment's sealed. The floor's warped and the wiring's bad. Nobody's lived there since the last tenant, and that was before you moved in." I asked, "Who was the last tenant?" He hesitated. "A woman named Margaret. Quiet type. Died in her sleep. It was sad. But that was a long time ago." I felt my stomach drop. He must have seen the color drain from my face because he added quickly, "Don't worry about it. It's just an old building. You probably heard the pipes, except I hadn't heard pipes. I'd heard her." That night I sat on my couch staring at the wall that separated our apartments. I knocked once just to prove something to myself. 3 seconds later, I heard it. A single gentle knock back. I froze. I waited a full minute, then whispered, "Mara." No answer. Just that smell again. Jasmine tea, stronger this time. Like someone had brewed it right next to me. The next morning, I found an envelope taped to my door. No name, no note, just a single old photograph inside. It showed my building from the street, dated 1987, in faded ink. I recognized the layout, the fire escapes, the same cracked window frames. But one thing stood out. The second floor window of 2B. A woman was standing there, wearing the same skirt, the same faint smile I remembered. Mara. I don't remember how long I stared at it. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe longer. When I finally looked up, her door, the one that had been locked for weeks, and was open again. Just a few inches. Every instinct told me to leave it alone, but I didn't. I pushed the door open. Inside, the air was stale and cold. The apartment was empty. No furniture, no curtains. Just dust-covered floors and faint outlines on the walls where pictures once hung. I could see where her record player might have sat. A square imprint on the floor near an outlet that hadn't been used in years. But the strangest part was the smell. Jasmine, stronger than ever. In the corner near the window was a small wooden table with a single teacup on it, half full. The tea was still warm. I backed out slowly, heart hammering, and shut the door. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? Over the next few days, things got worse. The humming returned, louder now and closer to my wall. My lights flickered every time it started. My cat, who normally slept by the window, began hissing at the wall between our apartments, eyes fixed on a single spot. Sometimes at night I'd hear footsteps pacing on the other side. Slow, deliberate, like someone walking barefoot. Then one night around 2 a.m., I woke to soft knocking. Not from her side, but from inside my own apartment. I followed the sound to my living room wall. The knocking continued, 3 slow taps, then silence. And then, right against my ear, a whisper. "Why did you leave the door open?" I stumbled back so fast I hit the coffee table. When I turned the lights on, everything stopped. The apartment was dead silent. I slept with my lamp on after that. A few weeks later, a new tenant moved into 2B, a college student named Danny. Nice girl, early 20s. I warned her, half joking, to expect creaks and weird noises. She laughed and said she wasn't scared of ghosts. But after her first night, she knocked on my door looking pale. "Hey, weird question," she said. "Do you ever smell flowers at night? Like jasmine?" I didn't answer. The humming started again that evening. Only this time it wasn't coming from the wall. It was coming from inside my apartment, near the photo I'd left on the counter. When I looked down, it was gone. And now sometimes when I walk down that hallway late at night, I see her apartment door open again, just a few inches, and hear her voice, soft and calm, drifting out like before. "You have a kind face. I hope you'll stay a while." It was the kind of trip my family had been dreaming of for years. Quiet, remote, a peaceful retreat away from the hustle and bustle of our everyday lives. Our lives were busy, filled with work, school, and endless obligations, and we rarely had time to spend with each other. So when my aunt proposed a weekend getaway to a secluded cabin nestled by the woods, everyone was excited. The plan was simple: a weekend of relaxation, family bonding, and escape from the world. We thought it would be just what we needed to refresh and reconnect. The cabin itself was exactly what we had imagined. Rustic, yet cozy, with large windows that framed beautiful views of the surrounding woods and the sparkling lake. The air was crisp and fresh, and everything about the place screamed serenity. Felt like a haven far from the chaos of the city. There was something almost magical about the location. Set deep in the forest, the nearest neighbor was miles away. For all intents and purposes, we were completely alone. The first day was exactly what we needed. We spent most of the afternoon swimming in the lake, surrounded by the lush greenery of the forest. The water was cool, and we laughed and joked as we swam around, enjoying each other's company. In the evening, we gathered on the porch, enjoying a simple family dinner. Grilled steaks, fresh vegetables, and laughter echoing across the peaceful woods. It was the perfect way to unwind. We felt like we were a world away from our busy lives. The kind of trip that made you think, this is how life is supposed to be. But as night fell, something shifted. The air, which had been warm and inviting throughout the day, became chilly and still. The calm that had enveloped us during the day was replaced by an odd sense of unease. I couldn't explain why, but I felt it. Like the woods were no longer friendly. The silence, which had been soothing before, began to feel suffocating. We all gathered inside the cabin that night, sitting in the living room with the lights low, playing cards and telling stories. The atmosphere was still relaxed, but I couldn't shake the sense that something was off. The kind of feeling you get when you're being watched, even though there's no logical reason to feel that way. And then, just as we were settling into the routine of the evening, the sound came. A loud crashing noise that seemed to shake the entire cabin. It was as though something had slammed against the walls, the sound echoing through the room. My heart jumped in my chest as I turned to my cousins. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. Everyone paused, listening intently. Silence followed, and I tried to tell myself that it was just the wind. Maybe a branch had fallen or an animal had knocked something over outside. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that. The sound was too heavy, too deliberate. It wasn't a random noise of nature. It felt like something or someone was trying to get our attention. "Maybe it's just an animal," someone suggested, trying to dismiss the unease hanging in the air. But I wasn't convinced. Still, we decided to ignore it, brushing it off as some random accident. It wasn't until the second crash, much louder this time, that we realized something was wrong. The entire cabin shook as though a massive force had slammed against the walls. I jumped up from my seat and my cousin Nikki followed suit. "Should we go check it out?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded. "We need to make sure everything is okay." We all stood up and slowly moved toward the door. There was an eerie stillness now, almost as though the whole forest had gone quiet in anticipation. I glanced out the window, but all I could see were shadows. The darkness outside seemed to swallow the trees, making it impossible to make out anything beyond the porch. But then came the third crash, followed by a series of sharp, deafening knocks against the back of the cabin, right below the window. My cousin Maria screamed, "What the hell is that?" Her voice was high-pitched, her eyes wide with fear. The knocks were so loud and insistent that it felt like someone was trying to break down the door. The sound reverberated through the walls, each one growing more urgent than the last. We were frozen in place for a moment, too afraid to move.
What was happening?
Who was outside? I thought about the nearby woods, but I couldn't bring myself to believe that any animal could make such a forceful noise. Something wasn't right. Something was out there. Without another word, we scrambled to grab our phones and call for help. My aunt, who was in the kitchen at the time, heard the panic in our voices and rushed over. She immediately called my uncle, who was sitting in another room nearby. The response was quick. My uncle was on his feet, pulling on his jacket, getting ready to head outside. My dad and some of the older male cousins joined him. Felt like the situation was escalating, and all I wanted was to know what was going on outside the cabin. My aunt, now visibly shaken, insisted that we stay inside. "Stay in here with the kids," she told my cousin Maria and me. "We'll go check it out." We waited in tense silence, our ears straining for any further sounds. Then the doorbell rang, soft but persistent. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Had someone gotten inside? Had they found a way in? I grabbed my phone to call the police, but before I could hit send, the knocking began again. My uncle and the others must have gone outside to investigate, but I wasn't sure if I was relieved or more terrified that they hadn't yet come back inside. My uncle finally knocked at the front door. "We need to get out. There's someone out there." I opened the door, and my uncle was standing there looking grim. My dad, cousins, and even my aunt looked shaken. Something had happened outside, something they couldn't explain. "Everyone, gather your things," my uncle said. his voice low and tense. "There's someone on the property." I froze. Someone was out there? This wasn't just a noise, an animal, or a branch falling. There was someone or something trying to get our attention. We rushed to pack up our belongings as quickly as we could. My heart was pounding in my chest. We moved into the main house, a little closer to safety, and huddled together in the living room to regroup. "I went out there," my uncle said, his voice thick with confusion. "I saw him, standing behind the garage, not moving, just staring." I shouted at him, but he didn't flinch. He didn't even acknowledge me. And then he just disappeared. "Disappeared?" I asked. "What do you mean?" There were no footsteps, no sounds. He just vanished like he was never there. The room fell silent. Everyone exchanged nervous glances, but no one spoke. My uncle was a logical man, not prone to exaggeration, and for him to say something like that was beyond unsettling. It was like he was never real, my aunt added softly, like he didn't even exist. But that wasn't all. My cousins, who had been wandering the yard looking for any sign of the stranger, came in with something in their hands. 2 jester cards. One was found near the main house, and the other near the garage. Both had strange, twisted designs, far from the typical cheerful jester imagery. One had an eerie, demonic expression on its face. It was like a symbol of mockery, something taunting us. We couldn't make sense of it. Who would leave something like that behind? What did it mean? My uncle checked around the cabin, hoping to find some trace of who or what had been out there. But there were no footprints, no tire tracks, nothing. It was as though the man had simply faded into the air. The strange events didn't stop that night. As the hours passed, the tension in the air thickened. My mom, still trying to sleep, woke around 4 a.m. to a soft sound on the porch. Footsteps. Then the rattling of the basement door. Someone was trying to break in. She ran downstairs, but by the time she reached the basement, the door had stopped shaking. The lock was still intact and no one was there. By morning, none of us felt safe. We packed up our things, ready to leave. The odd sense of being watched lingered as we drove away from the cabin, and we couldn't stop talking about what had happened. My mom, ever the realist, suggested that someone had been watching us from the nearby woods, maybe even planning the whole thing. But deep down, we all knew there was something more to it, something supernatural. We contacted the Airbnb host to report the incident, but she didn't respond right away. A week later, she finally sent a message saying she had reviewed the footage from the camera above the garage, but found nothing. That only left us with more questions. Did she know the man? Was he a neighbor, or was he something far more sinister? That weekend will always stay with me. I'll never forget the feeling of being watched, the jester cards left behind, and the strange figure who vanished into thin air. Whether it was a person, a spirit, or something else entirely, it's clear that the woods near that cabin are not as peaceful as they seem. We left that place, and I don't think we'll ever go back. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear the knocking at the door. Our family isn't the type to travel often. We are homebodies, the kind who are content to spend time in the comfort of our own homes, lounging around, cooking meals together, and playing board games in the evenings. So when my aunt proposed a trip, it was a big deal. She wanted to get the whole family together for something special, a getaway. We'd been through a lot that year, and a break sounded like exactly what we needed. The plan was simple, a trip to one of Michigan's Great Lakes, where we'd rent a house big enough to fit everyone, and spend a weekend basking in the natural beauty of the lake, far away from the noise and stress of everyday life. At first, everything seemed perfect. The house we found was an old, spacious Airbnb that sat right on the beach. It was a 2-story, with a massive deck that overlooked the water. The view was breathtaking, endless lake views stretching out into the horizon, with the sun dipping below it in the evenings like something out of a picture book. There was something serene about the place, something that immediately made you feel at ease. We all piled into cars, driving for hours to get there, and the excitement was palpable. After a long ride, we finally arrived, the house sprawling out in front of us, surrounded by tall trees that gave it a secluded feel. We all took a deep breath of the fresh lake air, feeling the weight of the world fall away, at least for a little while. Most of us chose rooms in the main house naturally. It was the larger, more modern part of the property, and the beds looked soft, the rooms spacious. But since there were so many of us, a few of us, including me and my cousins, were assigned to stay in the smaller guest house directly behind the main house. It was a 2-story garage that had been converted into living space. But honestly, it was in bad shape. The floors were creaky, the carpets old and stained, and there was an unmistakable smell of mildew that seemed to cling to every corner of the room. Still, it was a place to sleep, and we were just happy to be away, so we didn't complain. Our first day was bliss. We spent hours soaking up the sun on the beach, relaxing in the hot tub and having fun. It felt like we were living in a vacation dream, and for a while, we let ourselves believe that nothing could go wrong. The evening came, and with it the promise of a quiet night spent with the family. We ate dinner together, laughed, and told stories. As the night wore on, we eventually made our way back to our rooms. My cousins and I headed to the guest house, feeling the cool night air against our skin. It was peaceful, calm, too calm almost. That night, as we settled into our beds, a feeling crept over me that I couldn't quite shake. It was a subtle unease, a sense that something wasn't quite right, but I couldn't pinpoint why. Maybe it was the eerie quiet of the area, the feeling of being so far removed from the world around us. Or maybe it was the old garage itself, the way it seemed so out of place in an otherwise beautiful setting. It felt abandoned, as if the house had once been part of something bigger, but now it just sat there forgotten. Around midnight, I got up to use the bathroom. The guest house was small and the bathroom was just down the hall, so I didn't think much of it. As I walked back toward my room, I noticed something strange. A faint noise. At first, it sounded like the wind rattling the windows, but it wasn't the usual kind of wind. This sounded different, heavier, more forceful. I paused in the hallway listening. The sound grew louder and I realized it wasn't the wind at all. It sounded like something was banging on the walls of the garage as if trying to break through. My heart started to race. I crept closer to the door and listened more intently. But all I could hear was the sound of something pounding, the noise so harsh it rattled the entire building. I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't want to wake the others and sound paranoid, but this wasn't normal. The pounding continued, and I felt a knot in my stomach tighten. What could it be? I stood still for a moment, trying to rationalize it. Maybe an animal? A branch falling from a tree, maybe? But then it happened again, and again. The same deafening bang, shaking the entire guest house, this time so violently that I felt the floor tremble beneath me. I walked over to the window and peeked out. The darkness was thick, and the only light came from the dim glow of the street lamps outside. There was nothing out there. No one, no animal, just darkness. Yet the pounding continued. I rushed back to my room, hoping it was all in my head. I climbed into bed, pulling the covers tight around me, trying to block out the noise. But it wouldn't stop. The banging continued, relentless, as if it was happening right outside our door. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, it stopped. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt suffocating. My cousins were still asleep, unaware of the noises that had kept me awake for the past hour. I tried to go back to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, all I could hear was the echo of that pounding sound. I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was out there. The next morning, I didn't mention it. I didn't want to sound crazy. I thought maybe I was just imagining things, but the feeling of unease didn't go away. I couldn't stop thinking about the noise, about the way the guest house had felt like it was holding some kind of secret. We went about our day, enjoying the sunshine and the peaceful surroundings, but I couldn't shake the thought that something was wrong. That night after dinner, we were all sitting together in the living room, chatting and having fun, when we heard it again. The banging. This time it was louder, more urgent. My heart skipped a beat. Everyone else seemed to hear it too because we all froze listening. It was coming from the direction of the garage. My uncle immediately stood up and went outside, followed by a few of the older cousins. They checked around the property, making sure everything was okay. I stayed inside with the younger cousins, too scared to move. I couldn't explain it, but I had this overwhelming feeling that we weren't alone. It was as if someone or something was watching us, waiting. It was about 4 a.m. when my uncle came back inside. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. He explained that when he went outside to check, he saw someone, a figure standing behind the garage, not moving, just staring at him. At first, my uncle called out, thinking it was one of us, but the figure didn't respond. Instead, it just turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. And the most chilling part? The man didn't walk into the woods or along the path. No, he vanished into thin air. There were no footsteps, no crunching leaves, nothing. He just disappeared. That's when we realized something was terribly wrong. There were no signs of forced entry. No indication that anyone had been on the property. The banging, the figure behind the garage, the eerie feeling. It was all connected. But to what? Who was out there? And why had they been watching us? The next day, while cleaning up around the property, we found something else. A jester card. It was old and twisted, its edges torn, lying near the front door of the guest house. The card seemed out of place. It looked like something out of a circus. But the expression on the jester's face was twisted and demonic. One of my cousins mentioned that jesters symbolized mockery, and I couldn't help but feel that it was a sign, a warning. The noises, the figure, the card, it all felt like we were being taunted. That night, after all the commotion, we didn't feel safe staying in the guest house anymore. We packed up our things and moved into the main house. The next night, while some of us slept, others heard footsteps again, slow and deliberate. My mom, who had been sleeping in the living room by the large windows, woke up at 4 a.m. to the sound of someone trying the basement door. The lock was weak, and the rattling sound echoed through the house. She rushed down to check, but by the time she reached the door, it was quiet again. No one was there. That was it for us. We couldn't stay another night. We packed up and left the next morning, all of us shaken, unsure of what had happened or what we had encountered. We tried to make sense of it, but no explanation could satisfy the fear we felt. The strange banging, the figure who vanished, the eerie jester cards. Everything pointed to something sinister. But what was it? Was it a prank? A local trying to scare us away? Or something much darker that had been lurking there, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself? When we left, we contacted the Airbnb host, hoping for some explanation. She claimed she would review the footage from the camera above the garage door, but we never heard back. It was as if she knew something, or perhaps even knew the person who had been watching us. We may never know the truth, but what we do know is that something about that place was off, and it still haunts me every time I think about it.